On November 12, 2022, everything seemed normal in Moscow, Idaho. The leaves were changing colors. It was nearly a perfect warm fall day. Students Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin posed for a photo with two roommates before the big football game.
To the formation. Vandals return to the Big Sky.
And that's his first rushing touchdown of the season.
Later that night, Xana and Ethan went to a party at his fraternity, Sigma Chi, just a few blocks from the home where she lived with Maddie Kaylee and two other young female students. That night, a Twitch video from the grub truck recorded Kaylee and Maddie ordering food around 1:30 a.m. after hanging out at the Corner Club bar.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Thanks. I would like the
Okay.
Maddie and Kaylee hung out for a few minutes, doing what college kids do, looking at Kaylee's phone, at one point taking a selfie. Minutes later, the lifelong friends walked away, a guy in a white hoodie trailing behind. Kaylee and Maddie took a rideshare home. The driver told he had driven Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana home many times. He said they were all nice, happy, friendly girls. That morning, he dropped off Kaylee and Maddie just before 2 a.m. Police would later say Xana received a food delivery at 4 a.m., and her phone showed she was on TikTok at 4:12 a.m. A short time after that, Moscow police believed Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana were attacked and killed. Hours later, two roommates awoke. Then came a call to 911, and the home on King Road that had been the scene of so many parties became a crime scene. The brutality of this crime in this small college town of 25,000 was unbelievable. During the fall 2022 semester, 5 female University of Idaho students lived in a rented off-campus residence in the rural college town of Moscow, Idaho. The town of Moscow had not had a murder since 2015. The 3-story house had 6 bedrooms, 2 on each floor. Built on a hillside, the house had entrances on both the first and second floors. Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogen had their bedrooms on the 3rd floor. Gonsalves had recently moved out, but returned to show Mogen her new car. On the night of the murders, Gonsalves stayed in Mogen's room. The 2nd floor had the house's kitchen and the bedrooms of Xana Kernodle and surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen. On the night of the murders, Kernodle's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was staying at the house in Kernodle's room. The 1st floor of the house had the bedroom of another surviving roommate, Bethany Funke. Maddie Mogen and Kaylee Gonsalves both grew up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and had been best friends since childhood. Mogen, aged 21, was a senior majoring in marketing. She was a member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority and had a part-time job working at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow. Gonsalves, aged 21, was a senior majoring in general studies and a member of the Alpha Phi sorority. Gonsalves was set to graduate the following month, finishing her studies a semester early. She had already lined up a job with an IT firm in Texas and was planning to move shortly. Xana Kernodle, age 20, grew up in Avondale, Arizona, and later lived in Post Falls, Idaho. She was a junior majoring in marketing. Like Mogen, she was a member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority and had a part-time job working at the Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow. Ethan Chapin, aged 20, grew up in Mount Vernon, Washington, and was a triplet close to his siblings and parents. He was a sophomore majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management. Chapin was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. All 5 roommates and Chapin were in the house by 2 a.m. on November 13, 2022. Chapin and Kernodle had returned from an on-campus party at the nearby Sigma Chi fraternity, arriving home at 1:45 a.m. Mogen and Gonsalves had gone to a downtown sports bar called Corner Club, and then a food truck called Grub Truck, arriving home at 1:56 a.m. Between 2:26 to 2:52 a.m., the phones of Gonsalves and Mogen made several unanswered calls to the former longtime boyfriend of Gonsalves, a fellow student. Detectives believe all 4 murders occurred between 4 and 4:25 a.m. Kernodle appears to have been awake when the killer entered the house, as she had just received a DoorDash food order at around 4 a.m. and was using the TikTok app on her phone at 4:12 a.m. Surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, who was asleep in her bedroom on the 2nd floor, told investigators that she was awakened by a noise on the 3rd floor that she initially thought was Goncalves and her pet dog. She stated she later heard someone saying something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Mortensen believed this was Goncalves, although investigators believe it may have been Kernodle. Mortensen looked out her door but did not see anything. She stated she then heard what sounded like cawing from Kernodle's room. She opened her door again and heard an unfamiliar male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Security cameras near the house picked up the sound of whimpering, a loud thud, and a dog bark numerous times starting around 4:17 a.m. Mortensen opened her door a 3rd time and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered his mouth and nose walking towards her. The man, whom Mortensen stated she did not recognize, walked past her and exited through a sliding glass door in the kitchen. Mortensen stated she stood in a, quote, frozen shock phase and then locked herself in her room. She later told authorities she did not immediately call 911 after seeing a masked stranger in the house because she, quote, was intoxicated and didn't want to believe what was going on, unquote. At approximately 4:26 a.m., Mortensen went downstairs to join the other surviving roommate, Bethany Funke. On the way, Mortensen saw Kernodle lying on the floor of her bedroom. She later told police that she believed at the time Kernodle may have been intoxicated. The 2 surviving roommates then locked themselves in Funke's bedroom and spent several hours attempting to contact their other housemates. The following morning, they still had not heard anything from the other housemates, and Mortensen called friends over for help. Soon after arriving, one of the friends went to the 2nd floor where he discovered that Chapin and Kernodle did not have a pulse. He told the others to exit the home, and Funke called 911 at 11:58, requesting aid for an, quote, unconscious person, unquote. All 4 victims were pronounced dead at the home that afternoon. Kernodle and Chapin were discovered in her 2nd floor bedroom, with Kernodle lying on the floor and Chapin in bed. Mogan and Goncalves were found in the single bed in Mogan's room on the 3rd floor. All 4 were stabbed to death. The victims were not gagged or restrained, and none had been sexually assaulted. Goncalves had more than 20 stab wounds, in addition to injuries connected with asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. Kernodle had more than 50 stab wounds, many of them defensive wounds. Upon searching the residence, officers discovered Goncalves' dog, which she shared with her ex-boyfriend, Thaw, alive and unharmed on the 3rd floor. On the evening of November 13th, the university canceled classes for November 14th. It also scheduled a candlelight vigil on the UI administration building lawn on the evening of November 16th, then postponed it for 2 weeks. From the day of the killings, investigators initially said that there was no risk to the community. 3 days later, however, Moscow Police Chief James Fry said, "We cannot say that there is no threat to the community." Fall break was scheduled to begin after November 18th, with classes resuming on November 28th. Many students and Moscow residents, not trusting initial police assurances and fearing for their safety, began an early Thanksgiving holiday exodus from the area. Other residents who stayed were anxious and cautious, and some professors canceled their classes. Due to weather concerns, the candlelight vigil was moved indoors to the Kibbe Dome and held on the evening of November 30th.
I want you to say their names: Ethan, Zaina, Madison, Kaylee, and never forget.
I am still in utter shock, and I am so angry and so sad.
On November 19, Moscow police requested the public provide any video of the house that was recorded the night of the killings. A phone tip line and email address were created through the FBI for the public to submit information to officials. As of December 5, 2,600 emailed tips, 2,700 phone calls, and 1,000 digital media submissions were reportedly submitted to the tip lines. On December 24, investigators reported receiving over 15,000 tips regarding the case. The police initially left open the possibility of multiple perpetrators. Police stated that they believed it was a targeted attack, but have not concluded if the target was the residence or its occupants. In a November 23rd press conference, the Moscow police chief said that authorities received a number of tips, including one indicating that Gonsalves had a stalker, but could not verify that claim or identify any such individual by the time of the press conference. While this claim received much press attention at the time, it has yet to be mentioned in the case against the eventual suspect. After receiving hundreds of tips from the public, on December 15, police announced they were searching records of approximately 22,000 fifth-generation Hyundai Elantras made between 2011 and 2013. A camera in the area captured video of a white or light-colored Elantra around the time of the murders, which investigators noticed made multiple passes along the same route near the residence. Another surveillance recording obtained by investigators also showed an Elantra passing the victim's home 3 times, beginning around 3:29 a.m. At 4:04 a.m., the Elantra returned for a 4th time. At 4:20 a.m., the car was seen speeding away from the victim's neighborhood. Investigators in neighboring Pullman, Washington, a college town adjacent to Moscow, belied investigating a white Elantra owned by 28-year-old PhD student and teaching assistant Bryan Kohberger, who drove it home to the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania for the holidays with his father. Kohberger's Elantra was of a later year than the original police description. In Indiana, Kohberger was pulled over twice in a nearly 5-mile radius by the state police on Interstate 70 outside Greenfield for following too close tailgating. The FBI denied that it directed the state police to make the stops. Investigators obtained cell phone data showing that Kohberger's phone stopped connecting to the network in Pullman around 2:47 a.m. on November 13th, before reconnecting around 4:48 a.m. near Blaine, Idaho, which is near U.S. Highway 95 south of Moscow. Cell phone data also shows that his phone connected to a cell tower near the victim's residence around 9 a.m., approximately 5 hours after the killings, and pinged from the cell phone tower nearest the residence at least 12 times between June 2022 and November 13th. Investigators found DNA on a tan leather knife sheath on Mogen's bed. The DNA had no matches in the National Law Enforcement Database CODIS, and law enforcement decided to use genealogical DNA matching to identify a suspect. On November 22nd, investigators gave a DNA sample to forensic genealogy company Othram. The company began building potential trees, but the closest DNA match shared only 70.7 centimorgans of DNA with the suspect, a relationship the equivalent of sharing a great-great-grandparent. Othram suggested contacting one of 4 brothers who were potential relatives in order to narrow the pool, but the potential relatives declined. On December 10, Othram was asked to stop its work, and the FBI took over the investigation. Investigators at the FBI opted to utilize ancestral genealogical websites GEDmatch and MyHeritage, which the Bureau acknowledges included DNA samples of people who had not opted into law enforcement searches. This was done contrary to a Justice Department policy that investigators only use DNA samples from databases that provide explicit notice to their service users and the public that law enforcement may use their service sites. The FBI identified a match with 250 shared centimorgans of DNA, a much closer relative. A few days later, investigators began monitoring Kohberger's parents' home. Before the arrest, investigators monitored Kohberger outside his parents' Pennsylvania home in Monroe County. He was seen multiple times wearing surgical gloves and placing trash bags inside a neighbor's garbage can. The items were sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. Authorities also said Kohberger cleaned his car inside and outside, not missing an inch of area. According to authorities, a search of the home where Kohberger was arrested revealed a knife, a pistol, and a black face mask, as well as ID cards inside a glove in a box. Kohberger was taken into custody by an FBI SWAT team and Pennsylvania State Police on December 30th at his parents' home. Authorities found Kohberger in the kitchen, dressed in a shirt and shorts, wearing examination gloves, and putting trash into separate Ziploc baggies. Bryan Christopher Kohberger was born on November 21st, 1994. After graduating from Pleasant Valley High School in Brodheadville, Pennsylvania in 2013, he attended Monroe Career and Technical Institute in Bartonsville, but dropped out a year later. In 2015, he began work as a security officer for the Pleasant Valley School District. Kohberger later attended Northampton Community College campus in Tannersville, where he earned an associate degree in psychology in 2018. Kohberger then attended DeSales University in Center Valley, earning a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2020 and a master's degree in criminal justice in 2022. In the summer of 2022, Kohberger moved to Washington to pursue a PhD at Washington State University, WSU, in Pullman. Its campus is less than 8 miles, 13 kilometers west of Moscow. At the time of the killings, he was a doctoral student in criminology and had completed his first semester there just 9 days before his arrest. Kohberger had been a teaching assistant at WSU, and less than 2 weeks before the murders, faculty members met with him to discuss growing concerns and complaints about his behavior and conduct toward women. Kohberger was terminated from his teaching assistant role on December 19th in a decision based on his behavior and performance overall. Kohberger's defense team claimed that he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. However, the judge stated he had never seen any odd behavior from Kohberger during the hearings he had presided over in the last several months, noting Kohberger, by all accounts, is highly functioning, and that he would not allow a jury to hear testimony on an autism diagnosis unless Kohberger himself took the stand. Kohberger wrote online that he faced mental health challenges, suffers from tinnitus, and has a condition called visual snow syndrome. December 30th, 2022, Kohberger was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary, was appointed a public defender, and was detained without bond at the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. On his return to the county courthouse on January 3, 2023, he agreed to extradition. On January 4, he was flown to Pullman, driven to the Latah County Jail in Moscow, and held without bail. Kohberger made his first appearance in the Latah County Courthouse on January 5th and was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, for breaking into a home with the intent to commit a felony. 1 week later, on January 12th, Kohberger made his second appearance for a status conference in the same room at the courthouse. On May 17, 2023, the Latah County District Court announced that Kohberger was indicted by a grand jury on 5 charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. A preliminary probable cause hearing scheduled for June 26th was canceled after the indictment. In May 2023, Kohberger refused to enter a plea during his arraignment. His attorney said that Kohberger was standing silent on the charges. The judge entered a not guilty plea for him. On June 26, 2023, the Latah County Prosecutor's Office announced they were seeking the death penalty given the aggravating circumstances of the first-degree murder charges. Kohberger was denied bond. In January 2024, the judge granted the defense access under seal the results of the investigative genetic genealogy testing, which used a touch sample from the knife sheath left behind at the crime scene, which first led to the investigation of Kohberger. But how did it happen that the victims were exactly these 4 students? And was Kohberger acquainted with them beforehand? There is no definitive answer to this question. According to investigators and media reports, the official reason why he chose these particular victims remains unknown. And prosecutors themselves admit that only Kohberger knows his true motive. And perhaps it is something that makes sense only to him. Nevertheless, journalists and experts have put forward several theories to explain why this house and these students became his target. It is known that his phone was registered near the victim's house at least 12 to 23 times over the course of several months before the tragedy. Such frequent presence in the area suggests either an obsessive interest or an increased focus on one of the girls, most likely Kaylee or Maddie. Additionally, media outlets, particularly Vox, reported that Kohberger was allegedly following Maddie's Instagram account and had liked her photos, which led to speculation that he might have been infatuated with her or obsessed. In this theory, the other victims were simply in the zone of disaster, accidental witnesses whom he also killed. Among the most popular theories about his motive, several stand out. Theory A, obsession with one of the victims. As mentioned, Kohberger's social media activity and his interest in Maddie suggest that the crime may have been driven by fixation on her. Theory B, misogyny and parallels with the incel ideology. The authors of The Idaho 4: An American Tragedy, Ward and Patterson, draw parallels between Kohberger and Elliot Rodger, a notorious killer who acted out of misogyny and social isolation. They highlight traits such as introversion, difficulties interacting with women, obsession, and a distorted view of women. Theory C, academic failure and psychological pressure. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Kohberger lost his position as a teaching assistant after complaints about his behavior. This setback in his academic and professional life may have triggered a psychological crisis that culminated in violence. Theory D, control, sadism, and desire for dominance. Former police officer James Fry emphasized that this was a real fight for their lives and described Kohberger's actions as cold and filled with rage. According to this theory, the crime was an act of violence motivated by a desire for control, dominance, and cruel gratification. In conclusion, the ultimate motive remains a mystery, but the most widely discussed theories involve personal obsession, hatred of women, a psychological breakdown, and a need for domination. Taken together, they paint a picture of a crime that, in the eyes of experts, was deeply personal and irrational in nature. On September 9, 2024, the judge granted the defense's motion for a change of venue. The trial was scheduled to take place in Boise, with Judge Stephen Hippler presiding over the case. Kohberger was flown south to Boise on September 15th and held at the Ada County Jail. Judge Hippler tentatively set the start date for jury selection as August 4, 2025, with the jury trial beginning on August 18th. On June 30, 2025, it was announced that Kohberger had agreed to a deal to plead guilty to all counts against him and would be sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, avoiding the death penalty. Pending approval by the judge, Kohberger would also give up his right to any future appeals, guaranteeing that he will remain in prison until he dies. On July 2nd, Kohberger pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. On July 23, 2025, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences in prison without parole, as well as another 10 years for burglary. He also has to pay a combined fine of $250,000, $50,000 per count, and $20,000 combined in restitution, $5,000 per victim.
The main reason I'm up here today is so that everybody can understand what we lost. Because we lost 4 beautiful souls.
When I would meet people, they'd say, tell me about yourself. And the first thing I'd say is, well, I have this daughter and she's here's a picture of her. She's on the dean's list at the college.
It's hard that we are without these 4 beautiful kids with us tonight. We are eternally grateful that we spent so much time with him. And I want to remind you that that's the most important message that we have for you and your families, is to make sure that you spend as much time as possible with those people, because time is precious and it's something you can't get back.
Through all this, I hope we can all look through that dark tunnel and see the light and follow that light. And I pray that we have justice someday.